Hello and welcome back to my channel The Bleach Fanfiction. Join us as we explore the world of fanfiction and fantasy and bring you the best story and discussions. This is the first part of What If Ichigo's Died and was sent to another word by grimlock_broggy.so. Give this video a like and subscribe for more videos in future, so let's get into the fanfic. A deafening, monstrous screech filled the air as what was once Ichigo Kurosaki roared. The sound was an ear-piercing mix of rage and anguish. Desperately, a black blur shot towards the white beast, only for the berserker to turn to face it with its black blade singing through the air. There was a flash of light green, and the blur solidified into an emancipated demon, glowing lance in hand to block the midnight saber before it could remove yet another limb. Scattered around the roof of Las Noches were nearly 24 severed limbs, all proof of the berserker's superiority over the manifestation of despair. It was only thanks to the nihilistic demon's high-speed regeneration that he was alive, let alone capable of continuing to fight. An explosion rocked the battlefield as the beast broke yet another of the bat's lances. All of this was in complete opposite to an earlier point in the fight, before the berserker was released, where the bat had been flawless in his destruction of his opponent. Oddly enough, it was due to the demon's victory over his previous opponent that he was now losing. Had he not ended the life of the teenage protector, Ulquiorra would not now be facing the beast that had resided in the wizard's soul. Barely refraining from being flung off the roof of the palace from the wind pressure, two of Ichigo Kurosaki's friends were watching in horror. Yuryu Ishida, in denial over the death of his friend, was praying that Ichigo would be able to defeat Ulquiorra with his newest power boost. Orihime Inoue, filled with guilt, was screaming, pleading for her orange-haired friend to stop. Neither spectator knew that their cries were only angering the bull-horned creature further. "You bstrd. You killed King. I'll rip you apart." Many, Ichigo especially, believed that the hollow residing in the orange-haired teen's soul was nothing more than a lecherous, bloodthirsty animal. In actuality, he was one half of the teen's Zanpakuto, a fact only known by the other half and himself. Being the hollow half, the spirit didn't know how to correctly express his care for his wielder, and so he displayed it in the only way he could think of. Helping Ichigo whenever he was weak by taking over. His wielder, of course, took it the wrong way, not that the hollow's inability to remain passive helped. However, the hollow was still a Zanpakuto, and he wanted only to keep his wielder from harm. It was only due to Ichigo keeping him suppressed that the hollow didn't kill everyone who dared to attack the teen. When Ichigo's chest had been blasted open from Ulquiorra's point-blank Ciro Oscuras, Zangetsu turned livid. The hollow took control of the corpse to deal out proper punishment, and the Quincy, equally as enraged, permitted it. The Quincy was even tempted to release the shackles he had placed upon the hollow's strength, but he chose not to. The bat did not deserve to die from the Zanpakuto's true form. Though, the Quincy worried for the hollow. The hollow was actually the more emotional of the two halves, and his hate continually was amplified by their wielder's friends endlessly calling out Ichigo's name. In his grief, the hollow pinned the demon to the ground by stabbing his blade through the bat's stomach into the stone, and began to charge his Ciro. However, while Ulquiorra began to charge a defensive Ciro in return, the hollow half of Zangetsu snarled as he drew upon the full power of the blade, causing his crimson Ciro to melt into white. Only two knew of this, those being a rather powerful Quincy and Zangetsu himself, but the hybrid Zanpakuto was arguably the most powerful Zanpakuto to exist. The weapon, a dual blade when at its strongest, was one of few to have enough power to affect dimensions. This power, focused into the small orb of a Ciro, produced a completely different effect than intended when fired. Instead of vaporizing the bat and everything unlucky enough to be inside Las Noches, the orb distorted reality and ejected the hybrid Zanpakuto from the realm. Lucy Hartfilia was happily walking along the edge of a river towards an apartment she rented earlier that day. She couldn't help but giggle to herself as she stared at the back of her hand, a recently acquired pink mark residing there. The mark represented the Magic Guild fairy tale, and it was one Lucy had fantasized about joining. Today, she encountered one of the wizards of the guild, and he helped her join. It was a dream come true. She was interrupted in her musing by an unseen pressure forcing her to the ground. It lasted little longer than an instant before disappearing, but that instant felt like an eternity under the pressure which emanated hate, rage, and pain. She just barely managed to get to her knees when she suddenly found herself lifted off the ground and having difficulty breathing. She would have shrieked at what she saw if she had enough air to speak, as her eyes focused to decipher a white demon holding her up by the throat with its left hand. In its right, it held a long and thin sword colored entirely black. On its right shoulder, a shredded black strip of cloth was all that covered the beast's torso, and it wore equally ripped baggy black briefs. All of its fingers and toes ended in blackened points, and Lucy found herself on the verge of a heart attack when she saw black tattoos spreading out from the gaping hole where its heart should be. A mane of orange hair reached to its mid-back, and a white helmet-like mask covered its head. Pools of empty blackness made up the monster's eyes, and its bare teeth seemed stuck in some sadistic grin. Stripes of ebony flowed up from its chin, through its eyes, and over the top of its head, which called attention to the menacing pair of bull horns protruding from either side of the creature's head. The monster's shoulders and chest were heaving in what Lucy could tell was rage, and a horrifying echoing hiss crawled out of the demon's throat. "W-H-O-R-A." The monster forced out. It growled to itself before bringing its head closer to the terrified blondes. "W-H-Re-Okwi-Ra." The poor celestial mage was on the verge of tears. "What?" she whimpered. The responsive growl sounded akin to grinding stone. "Where, Ulquiorra?" Now the well-developed woman did break out in tears. I don't know WWHO that IIS. The beast seemed ready to strike the mage with his blade, but it instead turned inward, as if contemplating something. Suddenly, the bull-horned walking nightmare looked around, as if just noticing its surroundings. A barely restrained roar leaked out of the white-skinned monster's throat as it turned to face Lucy once again, who was again mere moments away from a heart attack. W-H-Re-E. It was breathing in rage at this point, and the erratic motions of its sword arm as the demon struggled with something was terrifying to the blonde. W-H-R-We. Was the monster's difficulty with speaking becoming more prominent? Regardless of whether it was or wasn't, Lucy was able to decipher what it was asking. K-Kingdom of a Fiore, C-City of Mamagnolia, St. Strawberry A.N. Bridge. Once again, the living nightmare turned its gaze inward, still huffing in barely controlled rage. Then, for a long moment, the creature stilled completely. Before Lucy could question anything, the monster practically threw the mage to the ground. She was about to scramble to her feet and make a run for it, but was paralyzed by the demon's next action. It bellowed out a roar full of hate and pain into the city, before tilting its head back. And screaming out to the sky so violently its body began to shake halfway through. The newest member of Fairy Tale was sure she was hearing things, but she could have sworn she heard sadness hidden within the second scream. Sharply, the monster raised its blade with the intent to level the city, but stopped, arms shaking with white-hot rage and heavy breaths visible in the cooling night. It remained that way for an agonizingly long time to the teen. So long, in fact, that Lucy jumped in fright upon the demon slowly lowering its blade to its side. Its huffing and the twitching of its arm remained, however. Then, Lucy heard it. The soft, but spine-chillingly deep growls emanating from the sword-wielding monster. She could only watch as it glanced towards an alleyway it then stomped into before resting its back against a wall and sliding into a sitting position with its legs spread out and sword resting in its hand. Minutes passed by before Lucy realized what had kept her from leaving. The behavior of the demon that had nearly killed her and was still shaking with emotion, was something she was familiar with. It was a reminder of her father, and herself, over the death of her mother, and how they each responded to it. The celestial mage made a decision, and she acted on it before she could psyche herself out. She got to her feet, patted the dirt off herself the best she could, and stood at the entrance of the alley. A slight tilt of the head towards her was the only thing that confirmed the beast having noticed her. "Would you like to stay at my place for the night?" Slowly, the demon fully turned its head towards Lucy. After a PRD of time so long the busty blonde nearly began to regret her decision, the bull-horned creature nodded and stood. Despite her new companion being a demon she wasn't completely sure had decided to keep her alive, the celestial mage smiled and began on her way to her apartment, the stomps of the monster behind her confirming it was following her. Most of the walk was spent in silence, except for a single, short interaction. "Zangetsu." The girl turned her head to face the demon she was skirting. "HM. Is that your name?" Without turning its head to look at her, it nodded. "Then nice to meet you, I'm Lucy Hartfilia." At a much later date, Lucy would realize its name was the only word the demon never had trouble speaking, no matter how enraged. "Hollow, while I share your rage, you must rein it in. At least, until we find something to release it upon. The only thing I want to let loose on is that emotionless F-. And now we can't F-kill him." It was thanks to the Quincy half of the blade that the Hollow's energy did not radiate out of their body. "I understand your frustration. As I said before, I too wish to see that damnable bat's head on a pike, but we must focus on more pressing matters." "Like what?" "That big-tit beach that tried to be nice after ya stopped me from killing her. Understanding where we are and how to get back. Remember we got here through your using our full power against Ulquiorra. If we find out how exactly that occurs, we can hopefully replicate it. I know how FNG happened. I charged a Zero with our power and we popped up on some random butt sidewalk. I'll just do it again and we'll pop back in that sheet's face, ready to rip I'm in half. And if that doesn't happen? If our situation gets worse? ITF won't. You cannot simply rush into a situation like this as you would a fight. If you do not wish to undergo the mental challenge of learning how to return, that is fine. I will. However, whilst I do so, take advantage of the time we have. Both of us must soothe, or at least control, our rage. We will ensure Ulquiorra regrets killing Ichigo, that is a promise, but we must understand what our existence entails without Ichigo for us to focus on." Ever so slowly, the Hollow began to calm down as the Quincy talked. "You are to be our body, as I have no interest in acquiring or maintaining control. Thus, you must socialize and find a way to support us and my research." "The F, you mean, support us?" A sigh was released from the elder of the two halves. "It seems you have been too caught up in your rage to notice, but the air in this place is not as Ryatsu-rich as it is in Hueco Mundo. There is not enough energy for us to survive off of that alone." The Hollow mentally snarled at the information. "Fine." The blonde suddenly entered the room, a weird smile on her face. Zangetsu realized they had forgotten to sleep in favor of arguing with each other and the sun was rising into the sky, signifying morning. Sitting up, the Zanpakuto shifted so that he was sitting normally on the couch, blade resting on the small table in front of him. "Good morning." The woman greeted. The Hollow raised a hand half-heartedly in greeting. "I'm gonna make some coffee, want some?" The spirit tilted its head in confusion. "What's coffee?" The Hollow asked his other half. "I do not know. Either it's a substance made after I separated from my original, or it is specific to this world. If the woman is making it for herself, it should be safe for consumption." Deciding to satiate his curiosity, the demon nodded his head. He got up, grabbing his hilt as he passed it, following the blonde towards her kitchen. Zangetsu watched in a combination of curiosity and awe as the blonde tinkered with a black contraption that had an opening large enough for a pot to slip into. The Hollow nearly swung at the machine and it began to softly rumble and a black liquid began pouring from inside the machination into the pot. Lucy, thankfully for her coffee pot, noticed. Wait. That thing is a coffee maker. Don't break it." She begged, waving her arms. Zangetsu turned to the mage, and she seemed to understand the unasked question. Coffee is made when you crush coffee beans and soak it in water, or I think that's how it works. It tastes kinda bitter when you have it by itself, but you can mix it with milk and other stuff to make it taste sweeter. Coffee makers make the coffee for you so that you don't have to do it yourself. Do I like bitter stuff? You've never tasted food. I personally prefer my food sweet. Why you've never eaten anything either. I may have not, but Yawatch has. You cheating a-hole. The coffee maker stopped rumbling, and with it, the liquid stopped pouring. Lucy opened an overhead cabinet and pulled out a pair of mugs. She quickly slid the pot out of the machine and poured the liquid into both cups, but she only filled to half. She handed that one to Zangetsu. Cautiously, the Zanpakuto picked up the cup and raised it to his nose, sniffing it. He took a moment to decide whether or not he liked the smell before tipping his head back and downing the drink in a mere 3 gulps. Like. As Lucy beamed, the hollow brought his focus towards the Quincy. Why is it so hard for me to talk? I do not know. If you had issues with moving or other tasks, I would attribute it to you becoming accustomed to the body. I would have also believed that hollows find it more difficult to speak, but neither you nor other sentient hollows have displayed that. I did notice, however, that your ability to speak deteriorated the more enraged you were, so that is at least a factor. Meh. Lucy walked to the sink and rinsed her glass, so the hollow followed and placed his empty cup on the counter. Sure, he was a literally heartless demon, but he at least had manners. After the blonde placed the cups to the side to dry, she turned to the white beast. Last night, I put together that you aren't from here, or you aren't familiar with this place, at least. If so, do you want to come with me to my guild? What, Goe, LD? Excuse me if I'm understanding you wrong, but do you know what a guild is? Zangetsu shook his head. Oh, good, I didn't misunderstand you. How about I explain while we walk over there? The Zanpakuto nodded in acceptance and followed the mage as she excitedly sauntered out of the apartment. The blonde began her explanation once they were walking side by side out of the complex. Okay, so magic guilds are governmentally funded organizations of wizards wherein people submit quests for help and wizards accept and complete those quests for rewards. People can ask for anything, and can even dash. Zangetsu held up a hand for Lucy to stop, and she did, although confused. What, wizard? Lucy's confusion practically tripled. You don't know what a wizard is? Zangetsu shook his head. Wow, you really aren't from around here. Wizards are, I guess the easiest way to explain it is that wizards are people who have access to special energy, and we can learn how to harness that energy through magic. So it's Ryatsu. Essentially. The mage removed a key ring from her belt and lifted it for the Zanpakuto to see. They were oddly designed, and almost all were silver. 3 were gold, and had odd symbols on them. If I remember correctly, those symbols represent famous constellations. I cannot recall what each symbol represents, however. I use celestial spirit magic, which allows me to make contracts with the physical manifestations of constellations and they help me in combat. The silver keys are the lesser-known constellations, while gold keys are of the 12 zodiac. While there are an unlimited amount of silver keys, there are only the 12 zodiac keys. So, the silver are like the cannon fodder Shinigami and the gold are like the captains? If I am not misunderstanding her explanation, that is correct. The hollow nodded, both to the Quincy and the blonde. Her smile grew even larger, and she moved so that she was in front of the spirit. Zangetsu saw a large building looming behind the celestial mage, and assumed that was the guild she was talking about. It seems we have perfect timing. As I was about to explain, I recently joined the guild of my dreams, the #1 guild in the kingdom of Fiore. Fairy tale. Weird name, but okay. Lucy, with dramatic flair, backed into the double doors, which swung open as her arms waved with grandiose. "Hell yeah, it's another Squad 11. The Hollow shouted with excitement. "Oh no, it's another Squad 11. The Quincy sighed with long-suffering annoyance. Inside the building, there was a massive brawl amongst the patrons, the silver-haired bartender being the only visible person not participating in the chaos. People were fighting, people were drinking, some hot chick in a bikini top was really drinking, and the energy Lucy called magic was being flung everywhere. This place'll be awesome. As far as I can sense, only a single person residing within the building is captain class in Ryatsu. Oh come on. Lucy grabbed Zangetsu's arm. Come on. I'll introduce you to some of my friends. The hybrid allowed the blonde to drag him around, and the first stop was surprisingly the chick drinking straight from a barrel whom the Hollow had spotted. Hey, Kana. The bikini-clad brunette tilted her head ever so slightly before placing the barrel on the ground. The woman wiped her mouth as she spun around in her seat to face the celestial mage and the Zanpakuto. The brunette stared at the white-skinned monster, before turning to her barrel. I gotta drink some more. I'm hallucinating that your new buddy is some weird demon. The brunette was mid-chug when Lucy nervously spoke up. He is a demon. Immediately, the barrel was dropped, and alcohol was spit out of the brunette's mouth. The liquid hit a smoking blonde with a pompadour in the face. The blonde sharply turned away, accidentally hitting his purple-haired friend in the chest, who retaliated by summoning some fire in his palm and throwing it at the smoker. Your friend is a what? The brunette screamed. Kana, this is my friend, Zangetsu. Zangetsu, this is Kana, Fairy Tail's resident alcoholic. Hold up. You cannot introduce having a demon for a friend like that. Explain what happened. After some contemplation, the Hollow decided to be helpful. Tried, kill, her. After a moment of staring from both women, Lucy turned to Kana and wordlessly nodded. Lucy, did he try to kill you? Another nod. What the hell? Zangetsu was actually curious about the answer, and so turned to the celestial mage expectantly. He looked like he lost someone important to him, so I decided to help him out. She explained gently. While Kana's worried expression softened, Zangetsu stilled. Was it that obvious? The newest member of Fairy Tail looked over and saw how her newest acquaintance reacted, so she quickly hugged him. The Hollow had to stop himself from instinctually attacking her. Sorry for bringing it up. She mumbled through his hole. The demon, for some reason, could not force himself to do anything other than growl softly. Kana sighed and grabbed her barrel again. If I'm gonna befriend a demon, I'm gonna have to be seeing triple. Oh. How much do you need to see triple? Lucy asked. Don't know. Never drank that much. Lucy's sweat dropped while the Hollow laughed. Out loud, it was a broken and spine-chilling cackle. Never mind then. After that laugh, I'm gonna need to be seeing quadruple. The busty brunette proceeded to tilt her head back, barrel held firmly in place by her hands and mouth. How's about we meet someone who won't need to be drunk to be nice? The Hollow shrugged once again before being dragged off towards the bar. The celestial mage hopped onto a bar stool, leaving the Hollow no other choice than to sit next to her, holding his blade in a reverse grip as if it were a staff. Hey Mira. Come meet my new friend. The silver-haired bartender that Zangetsu saw upon entering the building turned to the duo and shuffled over, cleaning a beer mug with a washcloth. The unblemished blue eyes of the woman were staring into the empty black pits of the demon with unending cheer. Hiya. I'm Mira Jane Strauss, but all of my friends call me Mira. Welcome to Fairy Tail. Although confused by the appealing woman's lack of fear, the Zanpakuto lifted his free hand in introduction. Zangetsu. Nice to meet Cha. Would you like anything to eat or drink? While we drank Lucy's coffee earlier, it was not enough to suffice a meal. With that, The hollow nodded towards the busty bartender. Both. It took a moment for the woman to understand what he meant, but once she did, a notepad and pen were in her hands. What would you like? Helpless since he knew no other food other than coffee, the Zanpakuto turned to the blonde next to him, who was in a state of shock over Myra's lack of terror. The hollow nudged the blonde with his elbow, which brought her out of her state. Food. Lucy's face willed with realization and she turned to the white-haired woman. Sorry, I forgot to mention, but Zangetsu here has problems talking. It's worse when he's angry. Gotcha. Here, just write down what you'd like. Her cheer not waning in the slightest, Mira held out the notepad and pen for the Zanpakuto to grab. He stared at it for a second before looking up at the expectant women. Don't, no. Both. Women. Blinked in confusion. How to write? Mira asked. Food? Lucy asked, her eyes focused on the hollows. The bull-horned monster pointed at his blonde acquaintance. The white-haired maiden made a surprised noise. How'd you figure that, Lucy? When I made him some, he didn't know what coffee was, or the coffee maker for that matter. He almost broke mine before I stopped him. If that's the case, then I'll make him one of my favorite dishes, kuzumochi. The white-haired woman immediately dashed off to the kitchen, leaving Zangetsu and Lucy waiting at the bar. Wait. Old man, do I know how to write? I'm not sure if even I can write. We both should, in theory. Kana came up from Lucy's right, slamming into the bar and making the celestial mage jump. The brunette lifted herself from the wood and blinked twice. Well, you're a not real thing. Kana shuffled over to the left unsteadily and placed an arm around Lucy's shoulders. You're not a not real thing. I think I drank too much. I never saw, was the word. Whatever the 5 is. I'm seeing 5ioya. Kana, you wanted to see quintuple. Well, at least quadruple. Why? You said you needed to be at least that drunk to be friends with Zangetsu. Zawatsu. Lucy silently pointed to the Zanpakuto, who waved once again. Oh. That. Yeah. Without any hesitation, the bikini-clad alcoholic drunkenly sauntered over to the demon and plopped herself into his lap, leaning back against the chest of the extremely confused spirit. The monster turned to Lucy, who was unresponsively red-faced. Although confused, the hollow wasn't going to reject the woman's actions. The Quincy sighed exhaustingly. The brunette began to snore, which caused the Quincy to release an even heavier sigh. Fudzo. I see you're getting along with Kana. Zangetsu looked up to see Mira holding a large plate filled with white cubes. They were gelatinous and covered in brown powder. A fork was lying on the side of the plate, like the hollow would use it. Acting on his instincts like a hollow should, the demon deemed the cubes to be of no threat and tossed one into his mouth. Immediately after, the plate was upturned into his open maw. The hollow didn't know what the hell it was that just went into his stomach, or why the texture was so weird, but it was delicious, so he didn't care. He slid the plate towards the beaming bartender. More. Mira was all too happy to oblige, grabbing the plate and ducking into the kitchen once more. Kana violently jumped, eyes still drunken and movements still sluggish. Heart. Lucy jumped too, finally knocked out of her daze. Upon seeing what was in front of her, the blonde sighed and gently placed a hand on Zangetsu's bicep. I'm gonna see if I can't get Kana to sober up a little with a walk and introduce some of the members to you while at it. You can stay here, I'll just point you out while you eat. Lucy didn't wait for a response, instead helping Kana off of the Zanpakuto and tossing one of the brunette's arms over her shoulders before slowly walking away. If the hollow cared at all, he stopped and Mira came back out of the kitchen, holding 2 massive plates of the white cubes in each arm. She slid the plates onto the bar, and the bull-horned monster dug in. I love cooking and I love kuzumochi, so ask for as much as you'd like. The blue-eyed model announced before popping one of the cube's kuzumochi. The hollow reminded himself into her mouth using a fork. Happily, the hollow continued to gorge on the whatever kuzumochi was as Mira disappeared into the kitchen once again. She returned much quicker, holding a large mug. She placed it next to the kuzumochi and the spirit curiously peered into it. An off-white liquid was resting inside the cup. It's called yogurt. It's got a sweet flavor, just like kuzumochi, so I thought you'd like it. Seeing no reason not to, the hollow picked up the mug and downed its contents. Blue tongue licking his teeth clean, the demon nodded in satisfaction and handed the cup to the overjoyed bartender. As she dashed into the kitchen, the white-skinned nightmare thought he heard the maiden mumble something about blonde demon children. Both halves agreeing to not pry into whatever the white-haired woman was talking about, Zangetsu continued to feast upon his food. Gray, don't. Something broke against the back of the Zanpakuto's head, and ice shards fell onto the bar. Snarling, the hollow turned to face the source, finding a seething black-haired man wearing nothing but boxers and holding whatever remained of his ice weapon in his right hand. Lucy and an apparently sober Kana were right behind the man, fear in their eyes and arms stretched out presumably to stop the ice-wielding man. The hollow immediately grabbed the hilt of his black blade and ripped it out of the wood it had been stabbed into so he could eat, ready to cleave the annoyance before him in half. Hollow. Calm yourself. He isn't strong enough to injure us, and we have faced colder than he has produced. He is not worth the effort to kill. He isn't going to need effort to kill. Exactly. There is no reason to kill him. The rage you are feeling is not directed at him, you simply want to use him to relieve it, and he is not even strong enough for you to do that. Growling deeply, the hollow dropped his sword arm from its ready position, instead choosing to punch a bala into the man's stomach faster than he could follow. The man was sent flying, through the gap between the women behind him, skimming one of the wooden support beams, and breaking a table before being stopped due to his back colliding with a wall. As the man slumped to the ground, Zangetsu rose from his seat, and Lucy immediately dashed forward and placed her hands on the beast's chest to stop him. Zangetsu, hold on. I know Gray attacked you, and I don't know why he did it, but you already won. Seeing what the blonde's train of thought was, the hollow shook his head. Want, sleep, not, ice, man. The celestial mage sighed in relief at the hollow's answer. I think I can help with that. Both the sword and the mage turned to Mira, who had a serious look on her face as she walked around the bar. Just follow me, I'll take you to a quiet corner of the guild for you to nap. The hollow nodded and flipped the weapon in his hand so he was holding it reverse by the blade. I'm gonna go check on Gray and question why he did that. Lucy announced. Let me know where he is after, Mira. The pale-skinned woman nodded and began walking, Zangetsu following. She led him to a corner of the guild with a table occupied by a single person, a short blue-haired woman wearing an orange dress and reading a book. Hey, Levi. The woman looked up curiously and blinked at Zangetsu. Mira smiled and continued. This is Zangetsu. He isn't a member of the guild, but he was eating some food I made and Gray attacked him. He ended up punching Gray across the guild, but he wanted to sleep instead of continuing to fight, so I was thinking of bringing him to your little reading corner. Do you mind? So long as he's quiet, not at all. No need to worry there. He ain't much of a talker. The cheery bartender turned to the Zanpakuto, her smile unending. Here you go. No one will bother you here, and it's really quiet because everyone lets Levi read. We're like a big, old family, here in Fairy Tale. Having done all she could for now, the busty woman returned to her bar. Levi and Zangetsu stared at each other for a moment, before the blonde attempted to return to her book. Attempted. Being. The key word as she squeaked from the spirit picking her up by the back of her dress. Wordlessly, the demon laid his sword atop the table, sat on the bench with his legs spread out and plopped the startled woman into her new seat, that being between the beast's legs. Before she could begin to reprimand the berserker, He wrapped his arms around her midsection with an unbreakable grip, rested his head in the crook of her neck, horns facing away of course, and contentedly purred as he cuddled the small woman, whose face was a steaming crimson. Elsewhere in the guild, images of blue-haired demons floated around inside the imagination of a certain bartender as she cooed over the action of the demon. It had so far been a month since Ichigo died. In that time, the Quincy and the Hollow began to get a grasp of what it meant to be alive. Wake up, eat, follow Lucy to the Fairy Tale Guild, and watch the daily life of the wizards around them before mimicking the behaviors that seemed normal. Wave a hand for food, drink copious amounts of booze, and ignore the public NDTY from the black-haired ice mage who only looked at the Hollow with hate. Neither half of the Zanpakuto learned much, the Hollow not wanting to wander the town and the Quincy not having many memories pertaining to daily life from Yawatch. Some of what they learned surprised them, however. For example, Zangetsu couldn't read, despite possessing knowledge of many languages from Yawatch. No matter how long they looked over Levi's shoulder as she read, or how many quest papers they stared at, they simply could not understand the characters. The Quincy theorized that it was due to them being in another world. Neither could bring themselves to search through Ichigo's lingering memories to confirm it. While not a member of the guild, Zangetsu was treated like one. Once she finally got over the shock of it all, Kana had challenged the Hollow to a drinking contest, which she proceeded to lose. The wizards around them had cheered and hollered about someone finally besting her, while the Hollow drank in the excitement. He saw no reason to explain that his high-speed regeneration allowed him to nullify the effects of the alcohol. Most of the Hollow's time was spent in Levi's reading corner, either dozing the day away with his head in her lap or attempting to understand the written language of the world with her beat red between his legs. Most of the guild had no issue with that, somehow ensuring their brawls never interrupted the duo. The only exceptions were Levi's apparent teammates and Gray. The Bluinette's teammates were possessive, despite her clearly seeing them as only friends. The one that could run noticeably faster than any other mage would regularly attempt to glare Zangetsu into SBMSN. In response, Zangetsu would return the glare hundredfold. The Hollow had so far gotten a man to PSS his breaths 4 times. The one that could make plants grow would attempt to prevent the Zanpakuto from getting close to Levi through use of his magic. Half-hearted swings easily tore apart any walls of vine, and the singular attempt to entangle the spirit in the plants ended in the blade walking through without acknowledging the greenery. Gray was a topic that the Quincy frequently pondered over in their immense free time. His current theory was that their form reminded the ice mage of someone that harmed him. The accidental nudist would attempt to fight Zangetsu daily, to the point that some guild members would sit down to watch. The Hollow would slowly increase the strength used to down the man every time they fought, in his personal way of testing the limits of the people of this world. While he would be knocked out with a single strike every time, Gray had yet to receive anything worse than heavy bruising from a despairingly weak Bala. The pink-haired fire-breather began challenging the demon once he saw the ice mage flung across the building by a backhand. The Hollow loved the mage's love of fighting and determination to keep going. Once the spirit learned that Natsu was Gray's rival, and he only started attacking him to prove he was better than the ice mage, he loved the dragon slayer even more. As for the blonde who took the Zanpakuto in, she frequently went on quests in order to afford her rent, spending around half her time away from the guild. She had gotten a key for the spirit to use on the nights where she'd be stuck on a quest, but the Hollow never used it in favor of following Levi to her home. The Bluinette never complained, explaining that the demon was good company and a better pillow. Every time Lucy came back from a quest, she would inform the spirit of what happened, which Zangetsu would happily listen to. The Hollow denied seeing the blonde as an older Yuzu, the Quincy always wished to know more about the world, and it always helped that Lucy would slide the Zanpakuto's hair as they laid across her lap. Lucy's first quest had been in some snowy mountains, to defeat perverted monkeys and rescue a guildmate. The Hollow didn't actually care who the member was, but the Quincy kept a record of every person in the Fairy Tale Guild. The member in Lucy's story was apparently one who used fire, and had a boy who was also part of the guild. Her second quest had been to gather a book from some weird rich guy with a backward sense of beauty. There was much more to the story, but the Hollow didn't pay attention to the small stuff while the Quincy didn't deem the rich man to be a threat and ignored the man's existence. Lucy did manage to get a new golden key from the man, to Zangetsu's great interest. Virgo, who Lucy had been all too happy to show off to the Zanpakuto. They had spent a few minutes discussing the dynamics of how Virgo changed her appearance to better suit Lucy's preferences, but they found that intrigue couldn't be maintained much longer than that. Which was a running theme, Zangetsu found. Their lack of innate ability to read the language of Fiore was unsurprising in hindsight, and nothing more. Their mimicry of the behaviors of the guild members was just that. Whenever the Hollow was not swatting away the mild annoyances that interrupted him only for moments at a time, or listening to Lucy recounting her quests, he was uninterested in anything other than sleeping. The Quincy seemed to find excuse after excuse for why he was not taking greater initiative in discovering a method to return home. They merely followed home whoever was willing to have them under their roof. Meal after meal was made for them by Mira Jane, and the Hollow kept to himself that he could not distinguish the flavors. Eat and sleep, the pattern became. Brush away the man seething with hatred, and pretend the cold inside was just the ice from the magic. Eat and sleep. Listen to the stories of a girl determined to thrive, and let her determine the meaning behind their silence. Eat and sleep. Hold close the girl at the center of a bubble of peace, and don't question why it's so easy to stay. Eat and sleep. The days blurred by, neither the Hollow nor the Quincy could make out how long it had been since they arrived. No one at the guild took any issue with them spending all their time there despite not being a member. The Blade pretended they could not see the gazes indicating sympathetic understanding. None of them could understand. Not truly. There was a zone of influence, faces and names that appeared often enough that they could be put together, but not much more than that. Lucy, Levi, Mira Jane, Natsu, Gray. Kana. Was very nearly at that point, towing the line simply due to her closeness with Lucy. Everyone else, everything else, was hardly more than blurs of color and sound, nothing the Zanpakuto could bring themselves to care about. But on one particular night, that pattern, and their blurred stream of consciousness, was interrupted. A hand on the shoulder woke them from their slumber, where they laid upon Lucy's couch. The Hollow tilted his head toward the source, as no one could tell when Zangetsu's eyes were open or not. Lucy was over them, slight concern and anxiety over her features. A little ways behind her, Natsu stood with his hands hanging off the back of his neck and visibly bored. The blue cat nearly always around him was sitting upon the coffee table, idly nibbling at a raw fish. Sorry to wake you. The blonde apologized immediately, lifting her hand from their shoulder. I was really hoping you could please do something for me. Keeping his gaze on the celestial spirit mage, Zangetsu sat up. I don't want to bother you or anything, Natsu and I were about to go on a quest, and I'm a little nervous about it, and I thought to myself that I would probably be less nervous if we had someone else on the quest with us, so I started wondering who I could ask to join, and the Hollow lifted his hand for her to stop. She shut her jaw, and stood up straight as she waited for his response. Think we should go? It makes no difference to myself whether we do or do not. Though seeing that this is the first time Lucy has felt uncomfortable going on a mission without assistance, I am inclined to believe there is good reasoning behind it. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Something's gotta be fucky if she wants us to play bodyguard. Their agreement was quick, prompting the Hollow to stand himself, picking up their blade as he did. The message was easily received by the mages, both Natsu and Lucy smiling. Thank you so much, Zangetsu. Let's go, we have to head to the docks. The blonde announced. While the implication was clear to them that the quest demanded a trip to the docks, it did not actually inform them of what the quest consisted of. We, go, but, explain. He was able to get out. Internally, the Hollow hissed. He spoke frequently, Mira Jane and Levi happily engaging in conversation with him to practice. However, it hasn't gotten at all easier to do so despite that. The tick Zangetsu picked up of it becoming even more difficult when unfocused had not lessened in the slightest. Outside of their name, or the one instance where he shouted Ulquiorra's name, the hollow had not been able to string together more than 2 syllables at a time. The blade's internal irritation was obviously not something the mages could pick up on, and thus they merely listened to the words he did say. The 3 of them and the cat all left Lucy's apartment, the girl locking her door as she began to follow the spirit's request. Okay, so the quest we're going on is to free this island from a curse that's been hurting the inhabitants. That's why we're going to the docks, so we can find someone who's willing to take us there. This answer only brought the demon to tilt his head as they left the building. His left hand lifted to point at himself. Why, help? It's 'cause the quest is S-class, and Lucy's being a wimp over it. Natsu announced, a teasing grin on his face. S-class, we've heard that before, ain't we? We've caught it used in idle chatter, nothing express. I'm under the impression it's some sort of indicator for the level of danger. I'm not being a wimp, you're the one who's overestimating your abilities by stealing an S-class quest in the first place. If you think I'm overmating or whatever, why did you agree to join? Because the reward is a zodiac key. And we got Zangetsu to agree to oversee the mission. But isn't he always asleep? The cat brought up. Doesn't Natsu always get knocked out immediately when he tries to fight him? She fired back. I do. To Lucy's great confusion, the scarfed man confirmed her words enthusiastically. I haven't even gotten him to actually use that sword of his yet. I wonder what type of magic sword it is. The blonde blinked at his musing. Aren't magic swords pretty rare? Wouldn't it be more likely that it's just a normal sword? The dragon slayer shook his head immediately, a certain expression on his face. No, that thing is definitely a magic sword. He announced with utmost seriousness. Zangetsu couldn't help but turn his head to the pink-haired man, interested to discover his reasoning. Normal swords smell like metal and leather. Magic swords usually have a hint of lacrima, or whatever magic they've got. Zangetsu's sword, I don't really know how to explain it right. I don't really like to go out of my way to smell it, it makes my nose tingle and buzz. But it smells like it's part of him. When he's holding it, I seriously can't tell where he ends and it begins. Well, then what does Zangetsu smell like? To both Zangetsu's and Lucy's shock, Natsu and the blue cat both frowned at the question, discomfort dressing their features. I don't like to think about it. The fire breather cryptically answered, the tone in his voice clear that he wanted to veer the conversation away from that topic. Let's just get to the boat and do the mission, okay? He rushed out before quickening his pace, wings appearing from the blue cat's back before he joined his partner. The blade stared at the dragon slayer's back, silent both in body and in their mindscape. They noticed Lucy's glance their way, filled with confusion and trepidation, before she went to keep step with Natsu. From the way the scarfed man was acting, Zangetsu felt they had a good idea of what scent their body possessed. If so, they agreed with him. They didn't want to think about it, either. At the docks, their team encountered a different, more prevalent issue than the mystery behind what Zangetsu smelled like. That being, no one was willing to take them to the island their mission was located on. Every time the group went up to a captain, they would be on board until they discovered where exactly the destination was. Well over a dozen turned them down without any hesitation, only some even bothering to explain that no one ever returned from the island. As they were talking to the last boat captain, something looked down upon them. Finally found you. That something being gray. Natsu, Lucy, and the blue cat all went wide-eyed. What are you doing here, Ice Prick? Stopping all of you from killing yourselves, obviously. I expect this out of Flame Brain, but Lucy? Seriously? He glanced around over the group again, his face curling in hatred and disgust as he spotted Zangetsu. And you thought it was a good idea to bring that thing to a cursed island? What, are you trying to get yourselves killed? Lucy turned defensive immediately, stepping in front of the spirit. He's not a thing, Gray. I don't know what your problem is with him, but he's joining us to protect us. Being the only one facing the demon, only Gray spotted the flinch that tore through the blade's body. Yeah. Is that why he's all twitchy? Because he's just so desperate to keep you safe. Hey, Zangetsu won't do anything to us. Natsu declared. And what makes you so certain, huh? He's a demon, in case you're as blind as you are stupid. The ice mage sneered. He doesn't smell like blood. The dragon slayer kept his voice level. That's not something you can wash off. He hasn't killed anyone yet. You mean? The surprisingly fully clothed man huffed in irritation, but did not attempt to argue with a dragonslayer's nose. It doesn't matter, not when I'm taking all of you back to the guild so you can be punished. Punished? Lucy's skin paled at the thought. Yeah. What did you think would happen if you stole an S-class quest? If you come back now, there's a chance you won't be removed from the guild. Removed? She cried, looking as though her soul was ready to leave her body. If I back out now, then what's the point of stealing it in the first place? I'm going, and you can't stop me. Too bad, this is a direct order from the MSTR. A grin formed upon the ice wizard's face. But if you're going to fight me so much, it's my obligation to force you to follow. He announced, ice forming in his right hand. You're talking like you can get me to listen to you, ya XHBTNST creep. Natsu shot back, a ball of flame appearing in his left palm. Of course I am, you piece of burning trash. Wait, guys, not here. Lucy tried to step between the two wizards. The boat captain breathed, his eyes widening. Are you trying to rid the island of its curse? Duh. Natsu declared confidently. Well, yeah. Lucy rubbed at her bicep nervously. Hey, you guys aren't leaving. Gray shouted angrily. Zangetsu remained perfectly silent, his gaze unwavering from the boat captain's form. If that's the case, then hop in. The captain permitted, a serious expression on his face. The ice wizard attempted to protest, but during his moment of shock from the captain's permission, Natsu struck. With a quick kick to the back of the raven-haired man's head, the pathological STRPR was out cold. The dragon slayer wasted no time in climbing inside and tying up his rival with rope, a proud gleam upon his face. Natsu. The celestial mage screeched. Hey, if he goes back to the guild, they'll send a licensed S-class mage after us. And the only active ones at the guild are Urza and Laxus, neither are good options for us. He reasoned. After a moment to consider that logic, Lucy joined Natsu and his cat inside, the three of them then turning towards the Zanpakuto. You still in, Zangetsu? The fire breather asked. The blade remained as still as a statue, empty glare firmly on the captain. The man shifted uncomfortably, his face more uncertain than anything else. I'm not sensing sheet, am I? The hollow demanded. Not unless we both are. The Quincy gravely confirmed. Zangetsu. Lucy sounded afraid, likely of the idea that the spirit was going to back out. Ain't my problem. With a snort, the Zanpakuto broke his stare and stepped into the boat, almost immediately collapsing down into a sitting position. Lucy and the cat did not notice the light sigh of relief from the captain, before he adjusted his grip on his oar and pushed them off from the dock. He looked out towards the horizon as he started them on their journey. Off to Galuna Island. The boat ride to Galuna Island was spent in awkward silence, Natsu vomiting off the side being ignored. Lucy and the cat sat at the front, each of them hugging their knees to their chests as they stared with wide, anxious eyes. Their gazes were focused on Zangetsu and Gray sitting opposite each other, the demon looking out at nothing while the ice wizard glared unceasingly, seemingly only not attempting to attack due to being tied with rope. The captain, at the back, was nearly as concerned as Lucy and the cat, his eyes finding the Zanpakuto often before straying to focus on maintaining their course. "Do you honestly believe you are capable of lifting the curse?" the captain asked, hesitantly. "Hopefully. We've got a decent variety of magic here, I'd say," Lucy offered, in an attempt to break the tension. "I've got my celestial spirit magic, Natsu is a fire dragon slayer, and Gray uses ice make magic. I don't think we've seen Zangetsu use his magic, but he's really strong. Are you strong enough to break it? The curse that has plagued that island?" He narrowed his eyes, looking off into the distance. "My name is Bobo, and I used to be a villager there. But because of that curse, I was forced to flee from Galuna, from my people." Lucy and Gray turned downcast at his words, sympathy covering their features. "What is the curse, anyway?" The cat tilted his head. Bobo refocused, gaze going towards the feline. "It is," he paused to dramatically throw back his cloak, "the demon curse." The wizards, who were not heaving into the water, stared in abject horror at witnessing the left arm of the captain. It was insectoid in nature, segmented and covered in hard shell, flesh tone bleeding to purple from the shoulder down. There was a clear, grotesque transition from skin to the texture of the arm, visible warping and distortion that screamed of an agonizing change. While the ice mage couldn't help but gawk in terror, emanating a sense of shock, disbelief, and even slight disgust, the celestial spirit mage gasped. "Is that why you were staring at him so hard, Zangetsu? You could tell he was a demon, too." The horned beast snapped his head to the blonde, a short snarl coming from his throat that brought her to retreat slightly. At her reaction, his shoulders hunched minutely as his head shrunk down, something gray caught out the corner of his eye. "Rent." The blade attempted to explain with his broken speech. He pointed at himself with his left hand, then to Bobo. "Not, same." To that explanation, the tied-up mage rolled his eyes with unhidden irritation. "Of course you're different," he hissed. "He and his village were cursed. They clearly don't want to be demons." A deep growl reverberated from the throat of the Zanpakuto as he stood, shoulders now hunched in threat and the points of his horns aimed directly at Gray. The same pressure Lucy experienced when Zangetsu first arrived returned, flattening everyone else to the wooden floor. The boat itself sunk noticeably, water sloshing over the sides before the current was disrupted by the same mysterious force. Weighted ripples coursed outward from their position, the natural churn of the ocean being overwhelmed by the immense pressure. It was dark and malevolent in nature, a menacing presence filled with hatred and bloodlust that bore down on them all, but most especially the ice wizard. Underneath its oppressive might, the dark-haired man turned nauseous, his skin growing pale and clammy with sweat. He was only able to be certain the demon's blade had not speared through his chest because he saw its position in his hand. "Gray," the key-bearer begged, barely capable of breathing due to the fury of their companion. "Apologize, please." "Hollow dash. F off." He snarled back immediately. "I'm getting real FNG tired, real FNG fast, of this grudge-having a-hole constantly coming at me, especially for shit I couldn't be involved with." "Are you truly that irritated by his antagonizing?" "That's not the FNG point. He's an annoying goddamn gnat that won't stop buzzing in my ear." Silence followed for a moment in the wake of his words, and so the hollow tightened his grip on his weapon. "You would alienate yourself from Lucy if you killed him." Before his eyes, the blade saw Gray's mouth move, struggling to form words that the spirit didn't bother to listen to. A tense quiet filled the space of the boat after that, the others all waiting with dread over Zangetsu's response. After what felt like eternity, the pressure finally lifted. The wizards all sighed with relief. Only an instant. Before the Zanpakuto slammed his right foot atop the chest of the ice mage, ripping all the air out from his lungs and violently shaking the boat. "Wait!" the girl cried as she reached out, her body still trembling. However, to the unanimous surprise of the wizards, the horned beast slapped his open hand against his chest, directly above the hole between his pectorals. "Zangetsu!" he practically roared, leaning close to Gray's face. "Hollow. Not demon." His point was emphasized by moving his hand to point at the mutated captain. The eyes of Gray, Lucy, and the cat automatically followed his gesture, and all three of them blinked after a moment of blank staring. Irritated, the Zanpakuto turned to look, before finding himself joining in their staring. Bobo was gone. What the F dash? The sheer shock and confusion separated the hollow from his rage. Where'd he go? As much as both halves of the blade desired the answer to that question, something stole their attention away from that intent. Perhaps due to Zangetsu's actions just a moment ago, or perhaps for unrelated reasons, a large wave was rising up, and heading straight towards them. The gravity of this was punctuated by Lucy and the cat wailing in terror whilst hugging each other, tears erupting from their eyes. Gray began desperately wiggling around, also screaming at the top of his lungs, while Natsu remained completely at the mercy of his motion sickness. FNG useless dumbass. The hollow sighed, the action manifesting physically as a heavy snort. Turning to the blonde, the blade reached out with his left hand and grabbed her by the back of her shirt. A low pound of sound not unlike the crack of thunder marked the use of sonido, the speed technique taking Zangetsu and the pair in his hold directly to the sandy beach of the island they were in the direct line of. Lucy hadn't even gotten a chance to register the change in scenery by the time two more bursts brought Natsu's limp form to be lying next to her. After depositing the dragon slayer onto the ground, the beast stood still for a moment, gazing out at nothing as though in the midst of contemplation. Just as the celestial spirit mage blinked in dumbfounded realization, another dense punch of thunder signified the Zanpakuto's disappearance once more. The key bearer was cut off by one final crack of sound. The horned monster stood on the beach once more, Gray being held in his grip by the rope still tying his limbs together. Lifting the ice wizard, Zangetsu turned him slightly so that the dark-haired man could clearly see the glower in his empty eye sockets, before opening his fist and allowing the man to fall to the ground. Zangetsu. At Lucy's call, the spirit calmly turned to face her. What was that? So, do. He stated simply. Natsu sat up, seemingly already back up to full strength. Could you have used that this entire time? He demanded to know. Yes. You're saying we could have avoided the boat? He screamed, flames curling out from his lips in anger. Why didn't you just do that? First time, here. The fire died immediately, as even he found the clear logic of Zangetsu did not know how to get there impossible to argue with. Fine. The dragon slayer accepted, before aggressively pointing at the Zanpakuto. But once we're back, I'm gonna make sure you study some maps so that I don't have to go on trains anymore. Natsu. Zangetsu isn't a mode of transportation. Lucy admonished. But then we save jewels on train tickets. He countered. Nearly instantly, her face shifted to a look of overwhelming sweetness as she turned towards the horned beast. Before she could get a single word out, he already had lifted his left hand with his middle finger raised, his opinion on the matter indisputably clear. Hey, it's hard to keep all my bills paid, you know. She defended. Can you stop arguing about exploitation and untie me? Gray interrupted, wiggling along the ground indignantly. Why should we, when you've been trying to stop us this entire time? The pink-haired man argued. We're already on the island, you idiot. His rival reasoned. There's no point in fighting it by now. I dunno, sounds fishy. The cat stroked his chin in faux thought, to which the ice mage rolled his eyes in annoyance. It's gonna leave a bad taste in my mouth if Natsu ends up being able to go up to the second floor before I can. I'd rather join the quest that will get us both to be S-class rather than sit on the sidelines and take the chance that he actually can do this quest on his own. He huffed. The dragon slayer and his feline companion adopted shark-like grins. Now that sounds like the truth. Natsu teased, kneeling by the other man to untie the ropes. After they left the beach, it did not take long to scour through the forest to find what they assumed to be the village that put out the request. It was fortified by a large wooden wall, signs warding off intrusion abundant and obvious. The front gate even had a large wooden plank going across, boldly ordering for others to keep out. How do we even get in to do the quest? Gray grumbled, peering at the wall for any potential openings. Let's just bust the door down. Natsu did not even attempt to consider an alternative, raising his fist as he went a step forward. Lucy slapped his shoulder immediately to stop him, before cupping her hands over her mouth. Excuse me. We're wizards from Fairy Tale. Can we be let inside? She called as loudly as she could. After a few moments, in which Lucy had to once more slap Natsu from attempting to casually continue with his plan, a pair of silhouettes appeared at the top of the gate. Who goes there? One of them demanded. We're wizards from Fairy Tale. She repeated herself. We're here for the request you put out. We haven't received word that the presumed guard was cut off by their companion bringing up an arm in front of their chest to get them to shuffle back half a step. You have a demon amongst you. The other caught, a mild tremor to his voice. The Fairy Tale mages all grew anxious, their awareness of the nature of the curse plaguing the village rising to the forefront of their minds. There was no doubt that there would be added difficulties navigating the mission while Zangetsu was with them, considering the valid reason the villagers possessed to persecute those demonic in nature. What? The original guard stumbled over his words as he took a second look at their group. They do. I don't care why you're here, as long as you're affiliated with that demon, you won't be allowed into our village. He spat before both guards went back to their previous positions and disappeared from their sight. Damn it. Natsu grit his teeth. They didn't even give us a chance to explain that Zangetsu isn't a demon. I don't think they'd believe us anyway, or possibly even care. The celestial spirit mage turned downtrodden. How are we going to complete the quest now? Gray joined them in discussing plans to convince the villagers to let them pass the door, while the blade cast his gaze at the gate. Or more specifically, what lay beyond it. Ryatsu of those two guards are flanking the top corners of that gate, and what I'm figuring is everyone else is a ways away from the walls. He mused, before he began walking towards the fortifications. The cat was the one to notice him, though it was far too late to do anything about it. Hey, what's Zangetsu doing? He voiced, getting the three mages to snap to the Zanpakuto. Right as he brought his blade arm back and swung. The force of his strike blew the main gate apart, the wood instantly shattering into minuscule splinters which scattered in the air. Zangetsu. The keybearer screamed, equal amounts of fury and fear in her tone. The mages ran up to the spirit as he stared at the black blade in his right hand, the inflexibility of his mask making it so that none of them could decipher the thoughts going through his mind. Oi, what just happened there? Confusion dressed the hollow's tone, almost completely hiding the undercurrent of worry. I don't know. The Quincy sharing in his emotions did not soothe him in the slightest. Outwardly, the Zanpakuto shook his head to clear away the thoughts before refocusing on the environment around him, and the chaos that resulted from his actions. The first things he caught was that the two guards from the top of the gate were directly in front of him, failing disastrously at piercing his hierro with their spears. Peering past them, he saw the villagers falling over themselves with panic, screaming and crying, begging for them to be spared. Natsu rushed in from the right, righteous anger distorting his features as a blast of fire blew away the guards who had been blunting their weapons on his skin. An annoyed snort left the spirit, the only precursor to him unleashing his Ryatsu once more. Nothing was spared, though if one were to ask, the Hollow would admit that was in part due to him not possessing the necessary control to focus his Ryatsu upon individuals. What he did have the control for was to not have it be particularly strong. The wizards with him, mostly due to being caught off guard, merely stumbled slightly. The villagers, far weaker and with children amongst their number, hardly needed more than a taste of his power to collapse and be brought to their knees. Casting his gaze and senses out, it did not appear that any were struggling to breathe, leading to the blade nodding in satisfaction. Flipping his blade so that it was in reverse grip, he brought the end of his hilt to Natsu's spine and gently pushed the other man forward, the best explanation he could give without struggling with words. Thankfully, the Dragon Slayer did indeed take the hint. "Zangetsu's on our side, a-holes," he shouted immediately. "We're here to help you out, and he's here to lend an extra hand if we happen to need it. He's not even related to the curse you guys are dealing with, this is the first time he's even been to this island. He agreed to join this quest just like all of us did, so if you have a problem with him trying to help, then you might as well have a problem with all of us trying to help." The cat supported. "Are you all truly here to lift the curse?" A cloaked man with a staff on the ground next to him asked. "We are," Lucy affirmed. Then we won't turn you down. If you could please, release us," the man begged. Natsu turned to the horned beast and nodded, who mutely ceased pressing his power onto the village. Once the force had lifted, the villagers began helping each other to their feet, whispering words of comfort to each other. The blade spotted flashes of abnormal colors, claws, and tails amidst the sea of cloaks. "Before any more can be said between us, there is something you must see. Everyone, take off your cloaks," the man with the staff ordered, the others all following promptly. To the shock of the wizards, and the unsurprise of the Zanpakuto, they were greeted by the sight of all the villagers being similarly mutated as Bobo. "Holy shit, those are some serious sideburns," Natsu amazed. He was immediately smacked in the back of the head by Lucy. "Every living being on this island, even the animals among us, have all been afflicted by this curse of ours." Who they assumed by now was the village leader gravely informed. "I don't want to seem insulting," Gray tenderly began, "but are you certain this is a curse, and not some sort of disease?" The leader nodded. "We have been examined by dozens of doctors, they all agree it is nothing they have ever witnessed before. But we know that it is a curse, for we know its source, the magic of the moon." The wizards of Fairy Tale, all closer to the crowd than the spirit was, none of them noticed the slight tilt of Zangetsu's head at the leader's words. "The magic of the moon," Lucy breathed. Originally, it was this island's defining feature to draw in the moonlight, until the island itself glowed with the same beauty as the moon itself. But, many years back, the moon suddenly turned purple. "Purple?" the cat voiced in disbelief. "The moon's never been purple," Natsu immediately retorted, his obvious confusion shared by most of their group. "That is what every outsider has stated, but you cannot argue with the facts. From anywhere on this island, the moon clearly appears purple, and when it comes out, we are all forced to undergo a transformation. Wait, guys, look. The moon is purple," the cat pointed out, causing them to turn to the sky. The clouds parted, revealing a full moon in all its glory. To the surprise of the newcomers, its shade was indeed a sickening violet. Before any of them could comment, a gasp of pain came from the village leader. "Witness, now," he declared, his voice racked with agony as he clutched at his chest. "The curse the moon has imposed upon us." As though that was the marker for a dam breaking, the villagers erupted into shouts of pain, their bodies all morphing before the eyes of those who had come to save them. Lucy held her hands over her mouth in horror, Natsu and Gray each seething as they realized they could not do anything to stop the changes occurring in front of them. The Zanpakuto, however, couldn't help but notice a certain fact about the energy signatures of the villagers while they transformed into demons. "I apologize for scaring you all so, but we have no control over these changes. When the purple moon comes out, we take these forms. The village leader announced, horns now protruding from his forehead. Do you understand why we call this a curse, now? The wizards looked out at the crowd, seeing parents attempt to comfort their children in their new skin. Once the morning comes, we return to our human forms, but, a little more of these demonic mutations remain every time we change back. Oh, no. Tears beaded in the corners of Lucy's eyes. We have put out a law, for those who have been completely consumed by the curse, in body and in soul. To kill them all, for the safety of those who remain. But what if you can change back, even after you're completely transformed? Natsu roared. You think we find any pleasure in killing our neighbors, our parents, or our children? The village leader screamed back with equal intensity. If we do not put them down, we open ourselves to the possibility of them killing us first. We attempted to first lock them away, but they just broke apart our prisons. The dragon slayer shrank before the misery in the man's words. The man took out a photograph, as his own tears started crawling down his face. I've had to put down my own son, when he was consumed by the curse. The eyes of the wizards once more widened at finding the photograph depicted a man they had seen before. Bobo? The celestial spirit mage whispered under her breath. So that's how he disappeared. Gray muttered. He must have not been able to find peace. Please, if you are all here to save our island from this despicable curse, I pray for your success. The village leader bowed. If this goes on much longer, I fear we'll soon all become demons. We promise you, on our honor as fairy tale wizards, that we will save you from your curse. Natsu declared fiercely. There is only one method that we have concluded which would dispel the curse. Natsu and Gray steeled themselves as they waited for the answer. You must destroy the moon. Their group had been scripted to a hut for them to stay in while they completed the mission, none of them missing that the hut was at the furthest edge of the village itself, and more of a shed than anything else. Or how the woman who had taken them there left in a rush as soon as they reached the door. Even after everything I said, they're still being a-holes to Zangetsu. Natsu grumbled, sitting atop the basket found inside the shed. It was clearly a space used for storage, the walls covered in tools for harvesting CRPs and hunting for food. From his position sitting against one of the walls, Gray swiveled his head to respond. However, he paused as he spotted the spirit in question sitting against the wall next to the fire breather. They're being transformed against their will by something they have no control over. He instead chose to say. You heard their story, too. It makes sense that they'd have a grudge against things that remind them of it. After he finished speaking, the ice mage stole a glance at the blade, breathing a sigh of relief when the horned beast displayed no reaction to his words. Doesn't mean I have to like it. The pink-haired mage complained, crossing his arms over his chest. By the way, how do they expect us to destroy the moon? Happy can't fly that high. The Zanpakuto's head lifted at the latter sentence, tilting in wordless confusion. The problem is not my ability to fly to the moon, Natsu. The cat announced, bringing the blade to grunt softly in acknowledgement. But we have to. He argued. It would drag Fairy Tale's name through the mud if we failed to complete a quest. It would drag Fairy Tale's name through the mud if we actually destroyed the moon. Lucy shrieked, annoyed that she even had to explain such a thing to the man. They said it themselves, that was the only thing the villagers could come up with as a solution. There has to be a better, more easily achievable method of fixing this. A small motion drew the key-bearer's eyes, a noise of surprise leaving her as she focused on it. Zangetsu. You had something to say? She questioned, seeing him with his left hand raised slightly. The other three turned to the spirit, curious as to what his input was going to be. Thing off. He rasped, pausing to think for a moment before pointing at the blonde. Plain, magic. Already invested in what his point might be, she nodded. Magic is energy that dash. That. He pointed at her more aggressively, which prompted both her and Gray to furrow their eyebrows in confusion before she caught on. Something about energy? She asked. The blade nodded. There's, weird. He stated. When, moon. He pointed upwards to ensure his words were being understood. That, not, change. Gray, surprisingly, was the one to piece it together first. You're saying that when the moon came out and caused them to change, their magical energy remained the same? The horned beast nodded affirmatively. Same, as, sun. He furthered. So their magical energy is just like Bobo's, despite that he fully succumbed to the curse and they haven't. Lucy mused. That is weird. Wait, how can you tell all of this? Can, sense, soul. Oh, is that part of your magic? She wondered. He stared at her, for an uncomfortably long time, before he finally silently nodded. Oi. Natsu interrupted, a yawn in his voice. We're getting into the territory of questions we can ask tomorrow, it's time for some shut-eye. Happy agreed, flopping onto the floor, seemingly having no complaints with sleeping on bare mat. His companion joined him nigh immediately. Yeah, I'm feeling real sleepy, too. The ice mage groaned as he, too, slumped over onto the floor. With their shelter being as small as it was, and the two wizards taking up the majority of that small space, Lucy chose to settle herself into a space she already knew she was comfortable with. It was a wordless interaction, of Zangetsu shifting his legs so that the blonde could slot herself in place with her back against his chest and his left arm loosely circling around her. Adjusting herself slightly, she leaned her head back against his left shoulder, her arms weaving around his forearm as she quickly slipped into dreamland. The Zanpakuto sat in silence for a long moment, attempting to join them in rest but finding himself incapable. Something had invaded his mind earlier, a particular thing that pervaded most all of his thoughts and refused to leave. A deep concern that caused a pit to form in the gut of both the Hollow and the Quincy, an icy dread stabbing into their consciousness. Once more bringing up the ebony sword that symbolized their very existence, Zangetsu stared intensely at the metal. After several moments, flickers of redlined black energy danced along the edge, akin to embers. The embers soon died, before the beast allowed the blade to fall to his side. He then glanced around to the sleeping forms of those sharing the hut with him, confirming their states before tilting his head upward slightly. Almost instantly, a furious red orb of Ryatsu manifested in front of the points of his horns, the light disappearing just as quickly as the technique was cancelled. Their head falling, Zangetsu couldn't help but worry over the revelation they just discovered. Why is it so hard to call a Getsuga Tensho? The Hollow's question, filled with anxiety and despair, echoed across their mindscape. MSTR. Letty shrieked as she ran into the guild, throwing the doors open in her rush and gathering the attention of most everyone inside. Her pupils had shrunk in panic, sweat rolling down her face and her breath rapid and shaky. Zangetsu's missing. She finished, dread and anxiety dripping from her words. Sitting atop the bar with his legs crossed and a mug next to him, Makarov's face pulled to a frown. He had paid close attention to the horned beast when he first arrived, admittedly concerned about how safe his guild would be in the demon's presence. After a few days, it had become clear that the spirit meant no harm, at least, no more than what any of the guild members were expecting out of each other. Concurrently, his time spent watching the spirit had also made it clear that accepting Lucy into the guild had been a good decision. There were very few in the guild who could not recognize the signs of grief, after all, and the demon practically emanated depression. However, outside of a PRD of acclimating to basic human behavior, Makarov didn't see why Zangetsu seemingly going missing was of serious concern. A brief glance at the beast's magical energy implied that he could hold his own against any S-class mage in Fairy Tail, possibly including Guildarts. Contrary to his looks, the demon was generally non-confrontational, appearing uninterested in anything, really. Outside of lacking any form of money for food, which Makarov had no shame in admitting likely wouldn't be a problem, there wasn't any reason to believe Zangetsu was in any danger simply because they didn't know where he was. "Catch your breath, my child," he gently encouraged. Although he didn't see reason for concern, it didn't change the fact that Levi was panicking in front of him. She did as asked, bracing her hands on her knees as she breathed. "Explain what happened. I'm sure it's not as bad as you think." He attempted to soothe, only for her head to shoot up, desperation in her eyes. "No. You don't understand," she shouted back immediately. He was staying with Lucy. A chill went through the guild hall, the balding MSTR feeling as though he had been dunked in icy waters. That single piece of information was crucial, as it led to one horrific conclusion: Zangetsu's absence was most likely due to him joining Natsu and Lucy on their quest. Their stolen S-class quest. That situation suddenly became far larger of an issue, and no longer one he could treat with any degree of passivity. He stood immediately, his magic power flaring. "Laxus," he demanded. "What do you want, you old geezer?" The blonde complained, as at ease now as he had been when they discovered Happy had stolen the Galuna Island quest. "I am ordering you to go out and retrieve Team Natsu and Zangetsu from Galuna Island. Bring the Thunder God tribe, commandeer a boat, I don't care. Pull them out of there as quickly as you can. You already sent out Gray to nab M.Y. The man with the lightning scar was cut off, his mocking and lackadaisical tone having permeated his every word. This is not a suggestion from family, this is a direct order from a guild MSTR to a guild member." The diminutive man grew nearly 10 feet in his rage, glaring at his grandson. "You will leave this very instant to retrieve Natsu, Happy, Gray, Lucy, and Zangetsu from Galuna Island, and bring them back here as quickly as you are capable." A flinch rocked through the man's body. It wasn't often that his grandfather reminded the guild of the immense power he possessed, power that granted him the title of Wizard Saint. Clicking his tongue, Laxus stood, a frustrated look on his face as he walked towards the stairs leading down to the ground floor of the guild. "Fine, I'll bring in the idiots and that moocher." He spat as he began stomping down the steps. "But know that this is because I don't want to deal with the legal trouble, you hear me?" The man blindly waved his arm forward, a trio of individuals immediately getting up from where they sat in a corner of the guild to rush over and trail behind him. "Legal trouble?" Jet asked only after Laxus and his team had left the building. "I get that Natsu stealing an S-class quest is an issue, but is it that bad?" "The problem is, not only is that a bad start," Mira Jane spoke up, "but the situation became a lot worse because Zangetsu joined. Since he's not a member of the guild, bringing him along for a quest means that anything that happens to him is on us. With no one on that quest being S-class, and the mission having been stolen, he could get a stiff back and we could have the Magic Council be coming for our heads." "Oh, sheet." The speedster gasped, his face paling nearly as much as Makarov's had upon first hearing the news. Levi turned further downtrodden, anxiously rubbing her arms. "I hadn't even considered that. I was more worried for his safety." The balding MSTR's face relaxed at her words, and he shrunk back down to his normal size, walking up to the nervous brunette. "That, at least, is something I can soothe." He spoke warmly. "You and I both know that Natsu and Gray, as impulsive as they may be, would never allow Fairy Tail's reputation to be dirted, and keeping Zangetsu safe would be included in that. And, in any case, I highly doubt Zangetsu actually has anything to worry about from the Galuna Island quest." The elder gave a light chuckle. "I garnered a feel of his magic power when he first came to the guild. There is no doubt in my mind that he could give any S-class wizard in Fairy Tail a run for their money." "Are you absolutely sure?" She continued to worry. Once more, he allowed a chuckle to leave him, his smile broadening when he saw her shoulders loosen just a bit. "He smacks around Natsu and Gray as easily as Urza does, my child," he reminded. You usually have a better view of that than I do. Finally, a small smile broke through her concern. Yeah, you're right. It fell quickly, though. I still can't help but worry about things going wrong. Something which I can understand. The man nodded sagely. Which is why I had Laxus go to ensure their safe return. Her lips turned up again, with more certainty this time. Right. The morning air of Galuna Island was humid, and the hollow hated it. His body didn't seem to sweat, but the moisture clung to his skin to make him feel uncomfortable and irritable. The blonde sitting on his shoulders didn't help, as it caused more moisture to build up and her sweat to roll down his shoulders and back. It had all started when they all woke in the early morning, to most everyone's complaints, with the celestial spirit mage declaring that they should scour the island to see if they could learn more about the curse. Everyone had eventually agreed that was indeed the best course of action, and they left the village, wherein the blonde remembered that a jungle took up the majority of the island. Lucy had abundantly refused to ruin her boots trekking through the mud, and the hollow had been half tempted to throw her into it just for that reason alone. Initially, her first response had been to summon some sort of walking grandfather clock, but it had taken one look at him, acknowledged his existence as a Vastolord-class hollow, and promptly returned to wherever it came from. With that in mind, her next course of action was to attempt convincing him to let her sit on his shoulders. He had refused, at first, but she had pestered him with puppy dog eyes until he gave in. This led to the situation they were currently in, where she sat comfortably on his shoulders with a gentle grasp on his horns to keep herself steady. Zangetsu, Happy whined, my wings are tired, can you carry me too? The blade did not even spend the effort to acknowledge the cat, continuing to stomp forward. Not that he communicated such to the rest of the team, but he had taken point due to having sent out a pulse of pesquisa. The radar-esque ability informed him of a great mass of people on the other side of the island, so he was going directly to that congregation. Natsu and Gray were searching high and low around him, each in their own uniquely stupid ways, at least in the Hollow's point of view. The Dragon Slayer's search methods were genuinely stupid, but kicking over rocks and scouring through bushes was at least an expected class of idiocy from him. The Ice Mage was attempting to look for tracks and signs of magic use. The Hollow was deeming him stupid due to a combination of mutual irritation and sincere curiosity over what the STRPR thought he was going to achieve. Funnily enough, none of the wizards had seemed to yet realize they were following the Zanpakuto, or that he was walking with such purpose. Luyuasi, can you convince Zangetsu to carry me too? If he doesn't want to carry you, that's outside of my power. She stated with false innocence. A gentle snarl left the demon's throat, with a mild shake of the shoulders to seal the deal of reminding the blonde of her position. She peeped as she was startled, before guiltily turning silent and looking away. Thank you for carrying me on your shoulders, Zangetsu. She mumbled for the sake of pacifying the blade. A snort left him, the only response he was interested in bothering with. By the way, where are you heading? It seems like you're not. Just wandering. Of course it was right after he took notice of their lack of awareness that one of them rectified it. Souls, this way. He pointed in the direction to emphasize his point. The fairy tale mages instantly all turned to stare at him. Natsu was frozen, arms deep into a bush, while Gray was on his hands and knees attempting to find tracks in the dirt. Happy was, just standing to the side. What? All four of them screamed. He turned his head slightly out of acknowledgement, before deciding to not speak. You can't just stop there. Lucy argued. Explain. Another snort left him, this time out of aggression. Sense, souls. The horned beast stated. Big, group, far, that, way. In perfect tandem, the four wizards gave a single stunned blink. Right. The Dragon Slayer started. He can do that. The Ice Mage continued. Why wasn't asking him to do that the first thing we did? Lucy finished. Because you're all FNG stupid. The Hollow couldn't help but complain. He would have shaken his head at their simplicity, but that would have likely knocked Lucy off balance. To his great relief, the other mages fell into step around him, having temporarily ceased in their searches. "So, can you tell how many are over there?" Gray asked, having lost his coat somewhere after leaving the village. That was actually a good question. The Hollow decided he would waive the next insult the ice-make wizard sent his way. He focused his Ryatsu sense over the mass on the other side of the island. 5, ard. He counted. 12, not. Can you tell how strong the wizards are? Lucy was the next to ask. A frustrated whine slipped from his throat. Yes, but, talk, hard. He reminded. All three of them winced, realizing that his particular impediment would necessitate creativity with explanations. How about a scale of 1 to 10? Natsu suggested. 1 is a normal guy that doesn't use magic, and let's say 10 being Urza. Unfortunately, while the other two nodded in support of that idea, there was one glaring issue. Who? The male duo tilted their heads in confusion. You know, Urza. The pink-haired one stated, as though it were obvious. She took Lucy and us on the lullaby quest. The Hollow remained staring blankly. She's one of the most famous members of Fairy Tail, her nickname is Titania. His expression did not change. She's always wearing armor, has long red hair, smells like strawberries. The mental image presented to him was nothing he was familiar with. She's gotten mad at Natsu and I for attacking you. Gray offered. Had us bow on our knees in forgiveness to you. Mira told her that you liked sweet things, so she sat at Levy's table with you after getting both you and her strawberry cake. Did she? Zangetsu's eaten a lot of different things since coming to this world, and it was relatively common that someone would sit and engage in conversation with Levy. He often tuned them out. In response to their reminders over the Urza person, he couldn't help but weakly shrug his left shoulder. Zangetsu, would you be able to tell me who Nab is? Lucy asked gently, a note in her voice sounding as though she already knew she wasn't going to like the answer. He grunted in the negative. What about someone by the name of Makarov? The male duo shot a look up at the blonde, before snapping their gazes down when he repeated himself. What about a jet? Or a droid? At this, he shook his head as much as he could. Natsu and Gray seemed horrified and confused. Final question, she announced. Outside of us and Levy, who in Fairy Tail are you familiar with? Me, R.A. He rasped. C.A., nah. All of the Fairy Tail mages were perturbed by his short answer. I see. She hummed mournfully. Anyone that isn't a constant presence ends up slipping from your mind, huh? That, he grunted affirmatively. The scarved man turned crestfallen, thankfully only sympathy appearing in his gaze. The STRPR, in opposition, scoffed, as though admonishing himself for thinking better of the Zanpakuto. Well, if Urza doesn't work, how about we then say Natsu is a 5? The blonde seemed determined to not have the most recent revelation distract them. We keep the 1 to 10 scale, with the same 1, that way if there's someone super strong, you can tell us by how much. The blade hummed in acknowledgement, then held out his left hand, fingers curled in. He stuck out his first finger for them to see. 8. He lifted his second. 5. His third and fourth. 3. Then his thumb. 2. So one person that's out of our league, one person that's on equal terms, 2 that we're stronger than, and 1 that's hardly more powerful than a normal person. She recounted. He bobbed his head slightly, just enough for her to tell he was confirming her words. Do you think you can beat the person stronger than us? She asked, slight nervousness in her tone. If the Hollow could sneer in derision, he would have. Him, against someone who was comparable to Hanataro? He'd have been insulted if it were anyone other than Lucy asking. Yes. After that conversation, it had been dreadfully quiet amongst their group. It didn't take a genius to understand that the silence was awkward on the part of the fairy tale mages, but Zangetsu couldn't bring themselves to care. In the Hollow's mind, it got the idiots to finally shut up, and in the Quincy's, it allowed him to ponder the situation without distraction. The Quincy wondered what the intent may be, for whatever was causing the transformation of the villagers. It was a side effect of something else, of that, he was absolutely certain. Since they've arrived on the island, there has been no interaction between the passive energy in the air and their party. That has allowed him to conclude that whatever the villagers were experiencing was not intentional, else it would already be attempting to affect them. As a Zanpakuto, Ryatsu control was innate to them, enhanced by their Quincy side. This meant that they were certain they weren't accidentally wrapping the fairy tale mages in a barrier of Ryatsu to keep them from being affected. It was already curious that the villagers were transforming in moonlight, especially if their Ryatsu was already akin to the supposedly fully transformed Bobo. If they were not completely turned, then it made no sense for their Ryatsu to be fully demonic, and if the moon were the cause, then their Ryatsu would change when it affected them. There was a heavy presence of foreign Ryatsu, but it simply hung like a fog rather than cling to individuals. There were definitely missing pieces in the equation, with a near certainty that answers would be found amongst the group they were nearly upon. By this, it meant that their group had reached an old and weathered temple. It was overgrown, covered in greenery and vines. The temple was made of large stone blocks, yellowed and worn down by time. There were two entrances they could see from their angle, one at each face of the pyramid-shaped temple. Standing at the edge of the clearing, just inside the brush, Zangetsu was the one to speak up. "Inside," he announced, hoping they understood his lack of words. "They're in there," Lucy clarified. "Let's head inside." "Natsu, at least try to be quiet, we don't want to risk running into that super strong mage." "But didn't Zangetsu already say that he could beat him?" the Dragon Slayer questioned. "We shouldn't be reliant on him." Gray huffed. "This is our quest. Would you rather know that someone else pulled all the weight?" "Fine," he whined. As a group, they snuck into the temple, or at least most of them snuck. While the mages all crouched and did their best to make as little noise as possible while traversing the clearing, the Zanpakuto irately stomped behind them. He doubted they would stop if he told them that everyone was deep inside, too deeply to be able to see or hear them. At least, that was the justification he gave himself. They quickly found their way inside, entering a massive main hall with stone pillars holding up the ceiling. Upon confirming all on their own that no one else was in the room, that is to say, forgetting that someone who could casually confirm the locations of their enemies was amongst their party, they all spread out to investigate. Lucy and Gray went close to the walls, checking to see if there were any markings indicating what purpose the temple originally served. Happy mindlessly wandered, munching on a fish he pulled from his backpack. Zangetsu remained static, standing in the center of the room in wait for the others to move on. Natsu stood in awe of how the stone appeared so brittle, yet had not collapsed under its own weight. Lifting a foot, he chose to impart that same amazement unto his comrades. "Guys, look how cool this is. This place looks so old, it's amazing that it's so sturdy." He punctuated this with a heavy stomp. The Zanpakuto silently watched as cracks rapidly spread from where the sandaled foot met the ground. "See, I can stomp on it and it's dash." In no time at all, the floor collapsed, a massive chunk underneath the fire breather falling first, then the rest following with blinding speed. Once more, the blade was unfortunately treated to the screams of the fairy tale mages as all of them were helpless to the unforgiving power that was gravity. A sight he witnessed while standing on a platform of Ryatsu he had formed under his feet as soon as the pink-haired moron lifted his foot. "Zangetsu, you bstrd, I see you flying." The mage in question bellowed as he fell. The blade did not even flinch, watching as they all crashed on the ground far beneath the temple. Collecting himself quickly, Natsu turned his head up and spat out a small fireball at the horned beast in irritation. It dispersed harmlessly upon his hierro, and he responded by lifting a chosen finger towards the scarved man. Before the dragon slayer could respond, Lucy hurled Happy at his head as hard as she could. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she shrieked. "The temple is barely standing and you decided to stomp on the floor. I didn't think it would come down." He attempted to argue back, rubbing the bruise on his head. "Then what did you think would happen, Flamebrain?" The Ice Mage responded, equally as enraged. While they shouted at each other, the spirit shot down in a burst of sonido, landing gracefully on the floor. He found himself glancing around, sensing that 3 of the enemy wizards, namely the weaker ones, were slowly encroaching on their position. Neither half doubted that they heard the collapse and were coming to investigate. It was at least an appreciated time saver that they were already at the underground level, only a few of the non-mages had been in the temple proper. The demon readied his blade as he faced the tunnel he presumed they would come down. Zangetsu did not know the structure of the tunnels, so they just decided to keep their gaze on the entryway that was closest to where the Ryatsu signatures were. Zangetsu. Natsu's call brought them to return some focus to the group of mages, and the blade informed them of this by turning his head slightly towards them. "Is this thing that ate you were talking about?" Baffled by the question, as he could sense nothing else in the room with them and certain that 8 was still on the other side of the temple, he had to bodily turn around towards the fire mage. This action allowed him to realize why Natsu asked the question, as even he was surprised by the sight before him. "That thing's as big as a Jillian." He couldn't help but compare. A gargantuan, and clearly demonic, figure was trapped in an equally massive block of ice, though they could see that it was noticeably thinner towards the top. The base of the glacier was far below them, with the level they were on being around waist height to the creature and its head almost reaching the temple main floor. Gray, the Quincy noticed, was glaring hatefully at the creature, physically shaking with restrained fury. The Zanpakuto figured they now understood where his grudge against them came from, even if they had yet to know the story as to what brought the hatred. Remembering that he had been asked a question, the spirit answered. "No. I could have told you that." The Ice Make Wizard ground out. "There's no way Deliora would be any less than it's an immortal force of destruction, a demon so immensely powerful that the only way to stop it was to seal it in that ice prison." Well, Zangetsu could confidently state that at least one part of that sentence was wrong. "Dead," he informed. Gray turned his head towards him, then quickly shifted back to glaring at the ice. "The ice must be keeping you from sensing it. Or it's so powerful that you can't. Nothing thrown at that thing was able to even scratch it, that ice is the only thing keeping it from continuing its rampage." The STRPR's first suggestion was outright impossible, and the second so ridiculously unlikely that he didn't want to waste the words to explain, so the Hollow simply decided that was Gray's free pass and turned back towards the tunnel. "Free, coming," he instead chose to announce. Natsu and Gray both immediately shifted into battle stances, facing the same direction the Zanpakuto was. Happy even lifted his fish menacingly. "Wait, no." Lucy drew their attention. "We still don't know anything about what's going on, let's hide and see if we can pick up on any hints on what's happening." The raven-haired man clicked his tongue, his face contorting in such a way that it was clear he didn't want to agree. "We're on a quest, we have to complete the goal." He spat out before ducking behind a large rock. The blonde pumped her fist at the small achievement and followed him, with Natsu and Happy joining them after a second of hesitation. Snarling, a sonido brought Zangetsu in between Lucy and Natsu, stabbing his blade into the ground and turning to sit back against the rock with his arms crossed over his chest. The 3 on their way were the weakest wizards of the enemy. He sincerely doubted they would be the ones to truly know anything that was going on. Having already been most of the way to them, it did not take long for the trio to make their way into the cavern. This is where the voices were coming from. A male voice sighed, as though irritated that they were assigned such a task. A moment of silence passed, likely the wizard looking around for any obvious signs of intruders. "Hey, did you bathe in the moon drip last night? You're looking a little odd." Both Lucy and the Quincy caught notice of the second statement, paying closer attention to the conversation as they realized they were likely to actually provide useful information. Another masculine voice responded angrily, correcting that his costume was just that. "Yuka-san, Tobi-san, it's so sad." A female voice bemoaned. "Angelica has been terrified all day, she won't even let me feed her. She's a rat, stop worrying about her." The second male voice remained angered. "She's not a rat. She's a hunter, prowling through the darkness." The woman took in a breath. "She is, love." Next to them, Natsu whispered that the trio were not from the island, explaining their smell gave them away. "Well, do we have intruders or not?" The first male complained. "I'm all sleepy. Angelica would not be so frightened over something mundane. A great evil must have come to this island." Unbeknownst to the trio, the fairy tale mages all silently turned to the Zanpakuto, who would have rolled his eyes had he been capable. He settled for flipping them off once more. "And it's almost time for the moonlight to be gathered. Why did such a sad thing have to happen now? Gathering moonlight? Surely it must be for some sort of ritual. For what purpose?" The Quincy asked to himself. "Let's drive out this evil before Riide-sama hears about it. Before the moon even appears," she declared. "They must have seen Deliora. They must not be allowed to live. We must send this evil to an endless slumber, in other words, introduce them to love." The angry male once again provided his own input, shouting that there was no need for flowery speech, and they were just going to kill the supposed evil. Spending no effort to look more thoroughly, the trio deemed the area to be clear and left to continue their search. "What the hell's going on here?" Natsu questioned once he felt they were far enough away. "Who were those people?" Happy continued. "More importantly, what could they have brought Deliora here for?" Gray snarled, which prompted Lucy and the Quincy's attention. "Brought?" The key-bearer encouraged. The ice mage's eyes widened, seemingly not having intended to provide such information. He was sealed in a glacier in the northern continent. Despite his surprise, he did not hesitate to explain. 10 years ago, he appeared somewhere Ispan. The man paused for a moment to gather himself, yet again glaring at the frozen beast. "My MSTR, who taught me magic, placed her life on the line to seal it up." "What?" Lucy held a hand over her mouth in shock, as Natsu's eyes widened. "I have no clue what this has to do with the curse on this island, but someone is planning something I refuse to come to pass." The shirtless man shouted heatedly. "Whoever this Ray-T is, if he's planning to disgrace the name of I won't let that happen." "This demon was sealed by your teacher?" the pink-haired man cautiously asked. "I'd never forget what Deliora looks like." He confirmed. "He's trapped in ice that cannot be melted, not even the hottest magic could do anything to it. It's a forbidden spell, called Iced Shell." Gray spoke the name with a trepidatious reverence. "But they should know that. So why move it?" "Maybe they don't know." Lucy offered. "Maybe they brought it here to try to melt it." The temperature lowered several degrees as he snapped his glare to her. "Why would they do that?" I don't know." She nervously responded in the face of such focused aggression. It was thanks to her suggestion, however, that Zangetsu pieced at least a small part of the puzzle together. The horned beast lifted his left hand and pointed directly at the frozen monster, the action catching the attention of the mages. "Ice, thin." While the other three simply stared at him with wide eyes, Gray violently turned to follow where the blade's finger pointed. When his gaze caught what the spirit had noticed nearly immediately, his skin paled. "They." His voice trembled. "They're melting." The man seemed at a complete loss, unable to comprehend the sight before him. Seeing that the other man was far too stunned to do anything but teeter on the edge of a breakdown, Zangetsu provided what they figured was the answer as to how. Moon, light. With it put together for her, the celestial spirit mage understood, horror dawning upon her. That's what they're doing. She realized. They're using moonlight to melt the ice trapping Deliora. There's no way. The ice mage screamed instantly. There's no way that's how it's being freed. There's no way that's what they're trying to do. There's no way anyone wants to have a monster like that out on the loose again. Some people are truly despicable, Gray. The blonde argued. And they want to do truly despicable things. No. He shook his head. There has to be more to it. There's something else we're missing here. This doesn't explain how the villagers are transforming. Gray turned his head up towards the sealed demon as his brain worked. We'll stay here until the moon comes out. He decided. We'll be able to see how they're melting the ice. We'll be able to figure out what's causing the transformation of the villagers. Natsu simply turned to Lucy, seemingly having deferred all decisions not combat related to her. She watched the ice make wizard for a long moment, before sighing heavily. It's barely past noon, but it's better to not lose sight of Deliora just in case something happens. We'll wait until the moon comes out, then stop this Ray-T guy once we find him. Gray nodded gratefully, and took a seat a little ways away, facing the monster with his back to the group. Shrugging, Natsu also wandered slightly, only going a couple steps before he claimed the spot as his own. Happy flew the short distance from where he had been to being by Natsu's side, laying back against his partner. Frowning slightly at how nearly everyone created distance between each other, Lucy hugged her legs to her chest. Tension filled the silence, a mixture of Gray's fear, Natsu's concern over the villagers, and Lucy's worry for her friends. As she thought over the situation, having little else to do than stew in said thoughts, something resurfaced in the blonde's mind. She had been unable to tackle it earlier, as things had quite quickly come up which prevented her from doing so. With an interruption in the next few hours unlikely, now was a good time to hope for a response. Hey, Zangetsu. The key-bearer began hesitantly. The blade turned his head slightly toward her, displaying his attentiveness. If you don't mind, what is a hollow? You said on the boat that's what you were. A grunt left him in acknowledgement, and his jaw quickly opened to form an explanation. However, after a moment of his jaw simply remaining open, it shut. Brown eyes blinked at the behavior, caught off guard by the hesitation. Her eyebrows furrowed in confusion as he tilted his head back, staring upwards in obvious thought. A tired hum left the demon, his chest rising and falling significantly with the heavy breath. The horned beast straightened his head so that he was staring forward, and that was when Lucy realized he was deliberating with how to execute the explanation with his speech difficulty in mind. But, it seemed to be more than that, she could tell even as soon as she had that realization. His hands clenched and relaxed, his fingers curling into fists before loosening repeatedly. His toes dug into the ground beneath him, stabbing into the stone and carving gouges. It was almost as though he was trying to keep himself from curling into a ball, and that longing was instead manifesting where it could. When he actually opened his mouth the second time, however, he spoke with a tone that stunned the group present with him. It was gentle, thoughtful, breathy in a sense that intoned it was stated with carefully managed emotion. Hollow, one, that. With gentleness that surprised the blonde, he lifted his hand to brush the tips of his fingers along the edge of the hole in his chest. Lost, heart. There was an intentional pause, it being unknown by the others whether it was so he could collect his thoughts or for some other, deeper reason. Still facing away, Gray lifted his head ever so slightly, his shoulders and back tensing with surprise. Lucy's lips parted as she absorbed the information, her eyes widening with a newfound clarity. Natsu, merely lying on the ground with his eyes closed, tensed his jaw as he frowned slightly. Zangetsu lifted his hand further, a thoughtful deliberateness to touching the side of his jaw. Mask, hides. What does it hide? She voiced, nearly a whisper. The Zanpakuto turned, his head lifting as he slightly tilted to have her at the edge of her vision, but not daring any more than that. Silence passed, heavy and dense with weary pain. There was no doubt in the minds of any of the fairy tale mages that the spirit's muteness in this instance was purposeful, and it inversely spoke so much more because of that. Once he was certain that his intent was understood, Zangetsu allowed his head to fall, sinking into a slumber-like haze to distance himself from the void in his heart, distinctly separate from the hole in his chest.